When I ask the parent what the main problem is, what is the current major challenge, the parent will often say things like, well, my daughter violates curfew, she doesn't come home until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., or my son is doing terrible at school, he's making straight F's, or I get a lot of disrespect and back talk at home. What the parent is doing really is describing a bunch of behavior problems, and the behavior problems are not the core issue. They're symptoms of a core issue, and we're going to look at the core issue now, which is we, as the parents, out of a well-intentioned, loving, caring heart, set up a dependency cycle, and we're going to look at that now. Before we look at the dependency cycle, I need to define two terms, stuff and freedom. Whenever I use the term stuff, I'm referring to anything other than basic needs. For example, designer clothes, TV, computer, video games, money, iPods, and so on. And when I use the term freedom, I'm referring to freedom to do activities, but also freedom from rules, freedom from chores, freedom from discipline, freedom from meeting a few reasonable parental expectations. So stuff simply means anything other than basic needs, the material goods. And freedom means not only freedom to do things, but also when the child has the freedom to avoid doing things. So the dependency cycle starts out like this. We want to bond with our children, and we want to make them happy because we love them. That's the bottom line for any parent, right? We want to bond with them. We want them to be happy because we love them. Now, maybe that's because we feel sorry for them for some reason, or maybe that's because we feel guilty about our parenting for some reason, or maybe we want them to have it better than we had it. But the bottom line is we want to bond with them. We want them to be happy because we love them. Now, as a result, and again, out of a well-intentioned, loving heart, we ended up giving our children too much stuff, or too much freedom, or both. Now, that in and of itself wasn't so bad, but we ended up setting up a dependency. In other words, our kid became dependent on us for free handouts of stuff and freedom. And the dependency is the core issue, because with dependency, there's a host of other problems. For example, wherever there is dependency, resentment is not far behind. If you have, for example, a spouse who's dependent on another spouse financially, at some level there's resentment. If you have a minority group in this particular society that is dependent on a majority group, there is resentment. If you have a child who is dependent on the parent, there is resentment. Another problem with this dependency is the kid has a huge sense of entitlement. She'll even tell you, you owe me, I shouldn't have to earn anything. Another problem with this dependency is the kid has a huge appetite for more and more stuff and freedom. In other words, it's not enough to be able to stay out until midnight. Now she wants to stay out until 2 a.m. Or it's not enough for him to have the $80 tennis shoes. Now he has to have the $150 tennis shoes. So with this dependency that we set up accidentally, we created resentment, a huge sense of entitlement, an insatiable appetite for more and more and more, and also, and perhaps most damaging, the child is emotionally underdeveloped. In other words, he may be 16 years old chronologically, but emotionally he's a little more like a 9-year-old. So this cycle started out, we want to bond with our kids and we want them to be happy. What we ended up with is we feel detached from our kid and they seem so damn unhappy. It's like we got the opposite of what we had hoped to achieve. Now, if we want to attach a term to this type of parenting, it's called overindulgent parenting or permissive parenting. Now, this doesn't mean you're a bad parent. In fact, if anything, it means that you were too nice and too giving. Now, I know that may sound ridiculous, but when we're too nice and we give too much, we have found that we get a lot of disrespect. We get the opposite of what we intended. Talk about a paradox, right? Overindulgent parenting is associated with children who are verbally aggressive, physically aggressive. They're overly dependent on the parents. They have less concern for others. In other words, they have a difficulty empathizing or putting themselves in someone else's shoes. They're very self-centered and selfish. They have a huge anger management problem. They lack motivation. You can't get them to do anything, and they're very manipulative. Now, this may sound terribly sarcastic or critical, but the overindulged child is not a very happy child, and he's not much fun to be around either. Some of the methods of overindulgence are, as we talked about a little bit ago, giving him too much stuff and too much freedom. But also, if we over-nurture or provide too much assistance, we're also overindulging. In other words, if we step in and take over because our child's not doing it right or not doing it fast enough. And another method of overindulgence is soft structure. And all I mean by that is lax rules, no chores, no family activities. Now, what are some of the reasons that a parent would overindulge, other than the fact that they thought they were doing a loving and caring thing? Well, some of us didn't have much money, so we compensated by providing the kid with a lot of freedom. Some of us felt guilty because we had to work all the time and we didn't have much time to spend with our kids. So maybe we just see them on the weekend and we throw money at them so they can go to the movies or whatever. Sometimes we overindulge as a response to a major life event, such as the death or illness of a parent or a loved one. Sometimes we overindulge because we feel sorry for our child. Maybe because we're divorced and the other parent never has contact with his child. Sometimes we overindulge because we were overindulged as a child and we just assume that that's the way you parent. Sometimes we overindulge because we fear confrontation. In other words, a daughter comes home and tells mom, I'm going to go over to so-and-so's house, and mom says, no, you're not. And daughter says, yes, I am. And an argument starts, and finally mom says, fine, just go, because she doesn't want an hour-long knockdown, drag-out argument. Sometimes it's just better to let her kids do what they want to avoid an argument. Sometimes we overindulge to correct our own parents' mistakes. In other words, we try to repair our own childhood issues. For example, maybe my parent was an alcoholic or a workaholic or too strict, so I want to parent differently, or I want my kids to have it better than I had it, or I don't want my kids to have to go through what I went through, or I want my kids to have what I didn't have. So as a result, we parent our kids based on what we want for the kid rather than on what the kid actually needs, or we parent the kid based on the way that we wanted to be parented as a child. Now, what are some of the results of overindulgence? Well, for one thing, the kid is in charge rather than the parent. In other words, the tail is wagging the dog. Another result of overindulgence is the kid feels entitled to privileges, but at the very same time, he doesn't feel responsible for his actions. Another result is overindulged kids do not get along well with authority figures. They believe the rules do not apply to them, and they're very dependent on the parents to give them what they want. But at the same time, they resent that dependency, and this resentment comes out as anger and ungratefulness and a strong desire for more and more and more. Now, I have even seen cases where the child has adjusted so completely to being catered to because he has everything under the sun at home in the way of material items. His home is almost like Candyland. And so when he goes to school, because he's used to having so much stimulation at home, when he goes to school and all he has is a pencil and a desk, he can't tolerate the lack of stimulation, and so he gets labeled ADHD. Now, parents who overindulge, they do have trouble defining the difference between nurturing behavior and overindulgence. They also have trouble knowing when to be the kid's buddy and when to be the kid's parent. They also have trouble saying no. And they also have trouble enforcing discipline and setting limits. And in some cases, overindulgent parents have difficulty believing that they're overindulging their kids. In any event, what we're going to do is we're going to pull dependency out of the equation, and how we do that is we set up a self-reliance cycle, and we're going to talk about that in the next page.